From Washington, D.C. and around the world, this is Government Matters with Mimi Geerges.
This is Government Matters, the only show covering the latest news trends and topics that matter to the business of government. I'm Mimi Geerges. The Office of Personnel Management is the federal government's HR agency. Joining me now with the latest news and announcements affecting federal civilian employees is the Director of OPM, Kiran Ahuja. Director Ahuja, welcome back to the program.
Thank you. Thanks for having me back.
So let's start with the newest announcement, which is regarding federal workers and paid time off to vote.
Yes, we're very excited about this announcement. It's, I believe it's an important endeavor as we think about, you're going to hear me say a lot about the government being a model employer and how being the largest employer, how we need to really set the standard expectations of how we want to see other employers show up and the kind of impact that we want. And this is exactly what we're doing here with our new voting guidance. It actually expands opportunities for voting, so we know that elections aren't just taking place the day of election. It gives more time, it gives time off for early voting, also for the day of elections, and that's a change here. So we want folks to be able to engage in their elections all up and down, local, state, federal. So that's a big piece of it, as well as the expansion of leave for participating as a nonpartisan poll worker. So, and I think this speaks to, federal government employees. They are committed to the civil service, committed to public service. I think, are great participants in our democracy, and we want to continue that. And I think this guidance sets the stage for how we want to engage in that, encourage that participation. We want to remove barriers to voting. And again, we want to be able to set the standard for how we should be showing up as an employer.
But what was the policy before? Like, what's the change here?
Well, it gives up to 4 hours of administrative leave. It goes beyond just election day to early voting. And the additional piece is actually the up to 4 hours to be a nonpartisan poll worker. So, I think there are lots of ways we want to promote civic duty and civic engagement, and this was a way that we thought would be meaningful to create that expansion and that opportunity for our federal workers.
I wonder if there's anything that OPM can do to encourage private employers to do the same thing, because it is important for people to be able to feel like they can go and vote without missing work.
Well, no, I mean, now we see where in the polling locations, where you see the rush in the morning before work gets started to kind of get your vote in or wait or try to race back after work, and certainly the early voting days help. We think, again, we obviously this is not something we can mandate or but setting an example we think is a persuasive way to share kind of what we're trying to do for our federal workers, why we think it's important that we should be encouraging greater participation, why we should remove those barriers. So it is not the racing in the morning or racing at the end of the day to try to, what we is a privilege, frankly, to be able to participate. We want to encourage that.
Kiran, a few weeks ago there was Equal Pay Day at the White House to promote gender pay equity. How are we in 2022 and women are still getting 83 cents on the dollar for equal work?
Right. No, I think, again, this is something we absolutely need to tackle. This was a part of, Mimi, we had talked about it before, I believe, when I was here last time and shared about the President's executive order focused on diversity, equity, inclusion, and accessibility. The issues around pay equity are a big part of this. We're adamant, and I think we know this. I mean, you just mentioned it. It's about economic fairness. It's about economic prosperity. But it's also about the moral imperative of what we should be doing. I mean, this is the right thing to do. I will say for the federal government, we do fare better. We have a 6% pay gap, gender pay gap, compared to 17% nationwide. We also,
which is still 6%
yes,
too much.
No, definitely. Yeah, exactly. We also, for the second year in a row, have no pay gap in our senior executive service. So we want to continue that trend. And certainly we have, which we find commendable, just with the way the pay system is set up, is much more equitable. There's a lot more transparency in how we list positions, the salary ranges that we provide in those listings. So we want to lean into that visibility. What we are doing is saying, to your point, what is that? We need to close that 6% pay gap. So a big part of this, the executive order that the president issued last year, as we come across like a full year, is that we are providing tools for agencies to do a pay equity analysis so they can determine where they have barriers, to be able to do a bit of that barrier analysis. And we're also issuing guidance later this year that's going to be focused on not using prior salary history to set your pay. I can tell you, when I came into the federal government, they used my nonprofit salary. And once you come in, you're on that trajectory, right? So it's important that, you know, that we have found that that really leads to the discrepancies farther along in your federal
career. And it just perpetuates that, because it's like, well, you were making this much, so I'll give you a little bit of a raise to do this job. We have the step increases. Again, it's a very equitable process once you're in, but it's so important where you start and when you come in the door, and where, you know, where your salary is set. So are you able to guarantee that women and men will finally make the same in the federal government?
Well, I mean, saying guarantee, we're certainly going to work hard to do it. I think we have a system in which, like I said, a large part of it is very transparent in how we set pay. I think we need to, you know, part of addressing the prior salary history, you know, through the regulatory process, you know, us wanting to provide the tools to agencies and being very proactive, I think are steps in the right direction. And certainly, you know, 6% is not good, but I think it's achievable to close that gap. And certainly we want to encourage these kinds of practices across the board, not just on the federal government.
In January, you announced a federal civilian minimum wage of $15 per hour. What was the motivation for that change?
You know, again, I think I don't think anyone has been kind of, you know, we've all experienced the impact of this pandemic. We have all talked about how important it is to support the workforce, you know, our frontline workers, our health workers. And I think for us, front and center, we've been talking a lot about what should be kind of the minimum wage. The president's been talking to, certainly appealing to Congress to set a minimum wage. We wanted to make sure if we were going to be pushing for legislation on the Hill, that we wanted to make sure that we had our house in order. And so we did that review, and we realized that we have a little less than 70,000 individuals in the federal government who were making less than $15 per hour. And so we raised their pay back at the end of January, and there were 7,000 of those individuals here just in the DMV. We think that this is, you know, again, setting the standard. You know, that we should be that model employer. We should ensure that we are giving workers a fair wage, and you know, frankly, we want to ensure that you know, those individuals who've been on the front lines. So these workers are our food and concession workers. There are clerical staff. There are workers in veterans hospitals. I mean, these are the folks who've been really showing up during this pandemic. And so
I thought it was interesting that it's by far the majority are in the Defense Department.
Yes. Very much so, very much so. Department of Defense, Veterans Affairs, and I believe a few other agencies, but the large majority have been in Department of Defense.
How much will this pay raise cost, and is it funded?
Well, you know, these were conversations we were having across the board, especially with Department of Defense. You know, I think there was general agreement that this is the right thing to do. Certainly we are appealing to those on the Hill that, you know, we're going to make sure within the federal government that we're not going to pay anyone less than $15 an hour. We certainly think that that's important across this country. It's been a long time since we've raised the federal minimum wage. And I think, you know, again, I don't have the exact numbers, but it was certainly not too much that we didn't think we should be paying people at least $15 an hour in the federal government.
All right. Well, Director Ahuja, so nice to talk to you. Thank you for giving us the updates.
Yeah, thank you.
Thanks for watching. If you enjoyed the video, give it a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel so you don't miss out on any future Government Matters interviews.